The sun over Afghanistan was merciless. In the jagged valleys of Kunar province, silence was a rare commodity broken only by the distant rumble of helicopters or the ominous crack of gunfire. But on this particular afternoon in 2009, the silence had weight. It settled into the bones of a village elder, who watched from a ridge as a lone figure disappeared into the canyon below. The man wore no insignia, his movements were deliberate. He was no soldier, but he wasn't a civilian either. He was something else, something far more dangerous. They called him the Ghost. His real name was Michael Risa, name whispered across Siat outposts with equal parts reverence and dread. For years, Rice had operated under deep cover, running off-the-books operations across the Afghan-Pakistani border. Fluent in Dari and Pashto, he slipped through Taliban strongholds like smoke. He was the agency's man in the shadows until he vanished. And when the CIA loses track of one of its own, they don't file a missing person report. They activate a manhunt. Rice hadn't always been a shadow. In Langley, they used to talk about him in the same breath as legendary field agents. He was part of the agency's elite special activities. Division men trained not just to gather intelligence, but to shape events, black ops, sabotage, assassinations. Rice excelled at all of it. He believed in the mission, in defending America's interests until something snapped. It began with an ambush. In the summer of 2008, Rice was embedded with a team of Afghan commandos near the town of Asadabad. The operation was supposed to be simple: intercept a weapons convoy believed to be supplying Taliban fighters in the region. But when they arrived, there was no convoy, only IEDs cleverly planted, remotely triggered. Rice lost 4 men. One was a 19-year-old translator he'd personally recruited. The explosion shattered more than bones. It shattered Rice's faith in the mission. Back at Bagram Air Base, he demanded answers. Who leaked the intel? Why had they been sent into a trap? The answers were vague. The paperwork vague. But Rice, always methodical, began digging. What he uncovered set off a chain of events the CIA has never officially acknowledged. He found logs that didn't match up, payments made to local informants who didn't exist, reports edited after the fact, and one name that kept buried: an Afghan tribal elder who was allegedly working with the CIA and simultaneously with the Taliban. When Rice brought this to his superiors, he was told to stand down. The official explanation: Farid's intelligence has saved more lives than its cost. That's the calculus. Rice didn't buy it. 2 weeks later, Farid's village was hit in a drone strike. The explosion was surgical to precise to be coincidence, and Rice was gone. No exfil, no debriefing. His safe house was abandoned, files gone, hard drives wiped. All that remained was a message scrawled on a concrete wall in red marker: truth is treason in the empire of lies. Langley panicked. The agency suspected Rice had turned, not to the Taliban, not even to another nation, but something potentially worse. He had gone rogue, with years of classified intelligence in his head, and a moral vendetta against the very institution that created him. An internal memo labeled him as asset compromised, Tier 1 surveillance required. Translated from CIA speak, Rice was now a threat to national security. The manhunt began quietly. Drones were tasked with scanning satellite heat signatures in regions Rice had once operated in. Informants were pressured. His family back in Virginia was put under surveillance. A black site in Jordan received orders to detain and interrogate a captured courier who may have had contact with him. But Rice wasn't just avoiding capture, he was fighting back. A string of intelligence leaks hit online forums frequented by investigative journalists, redacted documents showing illegal rendition programs, payments to warlords, and instances of civilian deaths covered up as combatant nutrition. The documents weren't just damning, they were surgical. Only someone on the inside could have known what to release. And with every leak, the agency's desperation grew. Meanwhile, on the ground in Afghanistan, rumors spread. A foreigner American maybe had been seen near Ghazni, wearing tribal clothes and traveling alone. He spoke the language like a native, treated villagers with respect, and always vanished before questions could be asked. The Taliban feared him. The CIA hunted him, and the locals. They called him Siara, the Black Spirit. Was it really Rice? Or had he become a myth? A symbol of betrayal in a land already haunted by too many ghosts. In Washington, the narrative shifted. It was no longer about recovery, it was about containment. They couldn't risk a public scandal, not with NATO alliances stretched thin, and Afghanistan unraveling. Rice had to be silenced, one way or another. The CIA called in its most discreet team, codenamed Talon 187. These weren't bureaucrats, they were hunters. Former Delta NSA cyber operatives, drone coordinators, all with plausible deniability. Their mission: track, locate, and neutralize Rice without leaving a trace. They started by analyzing pattern search histories, dead drops, chatter on encrypted Pashto forums. Then they hit a breakthrough in a northern village near Kunduz. A school had mysteriously received a shipment of medical supplies American-made, weeks before the NGO responsible had ever filed for customs clearance. One label bore a smudge, an old sad field marker used by Rice years earlier, Talon-27. moved within 48 hours. But when they arrived, the school had been burned to the ground. No children, no supplies, no rice. Only a single torn notebook page pinned to a blackened wall. You create the enemy you need. By 2012, the trail had gone cold. Rice had become a ghost among ghosts. But then came the Kandahar file. A junior analyst scanning old drone footage stumbled on a figure walking along a cliff edge at dawn. The gait was unmistakable. The date stamp. 2 days after a leaked cable exposed a covert weapons sale from Langley to a warlord in Helmand province. The leak had derailed a months-long operation and nearly ignited a diplomatic crisis. Coincidence? Or was Rice trying to dismantle the very machinery that once employed him? In Langley's inner sanctums, debate turned to panic. What if Rice had help? What if someone on the inside, another idealist? A whistleblower was feeding him intel. The CIA launched an internal probe, resulting in the reassignment of 14 staffers and the sudden resignation of a deputy director. But nothing stopped the leaks, and Rice. He remained a ghost. In the final days of 2013, a flash drive arrived anonymously at the front door of an independent human rights organization in Geneva. It contained 1.2 terabytes of encrypted data records of CIA black site interrogations, civilian death tallies, and operations targeting American citizens abroad. The metadata matched only one known source, Michael Rice. But what shocked the world wasn't the content. It was the closing video on the drive. A grainy recording, desert wind, a silhouette against the sun. Then, the voice low, steady, deliberate. If truth is treason, then let history be my judge. Cut to black. It was supposed to be a routine briefing. In a small room lit only by a flickering ceiling fan and the bluish glow of a laptop screen. CIA Station Chief Ronald Simpkins reviewed a file marked Black Lotus. It contained intelligence from a deep cover asset embedded inside one of the most dangerous Taliban splinter groups operating in Kunar province. The reports were unnervingly accurate locations of weapons caches, movements of high-ranking operatives, and even personal tensions within the insurgent command. Whoever this informant was, they weren't just guessing, they were inside. And that was the problem. The accuracy bordered on the impossible. No informant could have this level of access unless they were a part of it. And that's when the whispers began. Someone inside the CIA was too good, too plugged in, too invisible. His name, Daniel Hale. Hale was an elite CIA operative, fluent in Pashto, skilled in tribal politics, and, most dangerously, trusted by almost everyone in the agency's regional theater. In the field, he didn't carry himself like a ghost. He was the ghost. One who had blended so perfectly into the Afghan landscape that even the locals had given him a nickname, Ex-Marai, the lion who walks without sound. But the lion had grown teeth that Washington couldn't control. At Langley, analysts reviewing Hale's logs noticed disturbing trends. Missions he advised on were too effective. Raids launched based on his intelligence struck too precisely. Every time, the enemy's leadership was left crippled, but the rank and file remained oddly untouched, like pawns spared deliberately. Some began to suspect that Hale was shaping the war, not ending it. Theories spread in hushed tones. Was Hale a double agent? Or was he pursuing his own vision of the conflict, one where he chose who lived and died, manipulating both sides for reasons no one could quite decipher? Then came the intercept. A drone captured a grainy image from a village in Nuristan, a Taliban convoy escorted by an unidentified Westerner in Afghan tribal clothing. Analysts used gait recognition software. The verdict? 93% probability. It was Hale. No weapon in hand, no resistance. Just walking beside men the CIA had marked for death. That's when everything changed. Overnight, Operation Sandvale was born, a black bag mission authorized at the highest level to apprehend or eliminate Daniel Hale. His access was revoked, bank accounts frozen, cover identities collapsed, from revered asset to global fugitive in 48 hours. Hale's photo was quietly circulated through military bases, checkpoints, and even among warlords friendly to the West. The official reason? Compromise of mission integrity. The unofficial reason? They didn't understand what he had become. But Hale wasn't hiding. In fact, he resurfaced not through traditional intelligence, but in the stories whispered by Afghan villagers. They said a foreigner in traditional robes had walked alone into a village, plagued by a local warlord, and returned with the warlord's severed radio in his satchel. No bloodshed, just strategy. In another province, an IED factory exploded hours after Zemarai was seen entering a nearby tea house, speaking calmly with known bomb makers. These weren't the actions of a traitor. They were surgical acts of war, precise, personal, and silent. To summon the CIA, Hale had become a ghost who no longer answered to his masters. A rogue variable in a region where control was already slipping like sand through fingers. One night, a drone operator monitoring northern Paksha noticed something strange. A US drone feed being spoofed and redirected. The origin of the hack? Unknown. The signature used in the attack? CIA-level encryption. Only one man had that skill set and that motive. And then came the message. A courier delivered an envelope to a safe house in Kabul. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no coordinates. Just one phrase. The war you fight is no longer the war that's being fought. Signed, simply, Z. Panic spread within Black Ops circles. If Hale had access to CIA drone protocols, he could manipulate strikes, mislead pilots, even redirect Hellfire missiles. He could paint a target and vanish before anyone realized what had happened. The agency formed a special unit, Task Force, Viper, composed of former SEALs, JSOC intelligence agents, and CIA veterans who had worked with Hale. Their mission: track and eliminate the man they had once called a brother. But Viper's first operation failed spectacularly. They located Hale's last known position in a village nestled in the Korengal Valley. A night raid was launched. Quiet, clean. But when they entered the compound, they found nothing but a single chessboard. Mid-game, the queen was missing. The note beside it read, "Still playing." The hunt escalated. Langley poured resources into the manhunt, even tapping foreign intelligence services. The British MI6 reported sightings of Hale near the Khyber Pass, but all attempts to intercept ended with empty coordinates and scrambled signals. Then, a more chilling development: a Taliban commander captured by Pakistani forces confessed that someone had been feeding them precise escape routes that allowed top insurgents to evade drone strikes by minutes. The descriptions he gave of the informant: white mid-40s, speaks Pashto, wears a tribal pendant shaped like a lion. Hale wasn't just avoiding the war, he was playing both sides of it, and he was winning. Inside Langley, debates erupted. Was Hale driven by ideology, revenge? Had he witnessed something so damning in his years on the ground that he no longer believed in the mission? Or worse, had he discovered a hidden war being waged behind the official one? Some believed Hale was attempting to dismantle corruption within the CIA's own Afghan operations, eliminating warlords, drug traffickers, and contractors that the agency quietly relied on. If true, then Hale wasn't a traitor, he was a cleaner. But, to others, he was simply a threat, a rogue weapon who could destabilize not only the war effort, but America's entire intelligence infrastructure in the region. The tipping point came when an encrypted message was intercepted near Baghdad. It was brief, untraceable, and terrifying in its implications. "I know who betrayed Bravo Red. I know why you buried it." That message, analysts confirmed, could only have come from someone with knowledge of the classified incident known as Bravo Red. A mission so deeply buried that only 4 people in the entire CIA had access to its full files. Daniel Hale had become something else, not just a fugitive, not just a threat. He was now the key to a conspiracy that no one wanted uncovered, and as the net closed around him, one question haunted every agent who had ever worked with him. What did Daniel Hale know, and why had he chosen silence over safety? Langley's top brass was in full damage control mode. Officially, the rogue operation in Kandahar never happened. The mission logs were purged, the satellites retasked, and the few assets who knew the truth were silenced, reassigned, or disappeared altogether. But the story of Agent Michael Brenner didn't vanish. In fact, it grew louder in the shadows, whispered among field agents, quietly debated by analysts, and feared by those still operating in the Afghan-Pakistani borderlands. Meanwhile, Michael Brenner had become a ghost. He moved through the jagged terrain of the Hindu Kush with the instinct of someone who had lived too many lives in the dark. Locals spoke of an American who never used roads, who bartered for food and silence, who disappeared before the sun rose. Some called him a mercenary. Others claimed he was cursed, a man whose own country had turned on him. But in truth, Brenner was on a mission of his own. He had uncovered something in Afghanistan years ago that had terrified the very institution. He served a black file buried inside a CIA substation in Bagram. It contained names not of enemies, but of Americans. Defense contractors, private military firms, political operatives, all deeply embedded in a secret supply line that fueled both sides of the conflict. The war machine didn't care who won, only that the war never ended. He had taken a single hard drive and vanished. That was the real reason Langley wanted him dead. Not because he had disobeyed orders, but because he had learned the truth. While Washington denied any involvement, a new type of hunter was unleashed. Not CIA, not military, but something in between. A joint task force of elite contractors off the books, unsanctioned, and paid in silence. Their mission? Locate, capture, and eliminate Michael Brenner. These weren't agents who followed the rulebook. They were ghosts hunting a ghost. In a remote village near Jalavad, Brenner met with an old contact, a tribal elder who had once worked as an interpreter for U.S. forces. The elder warned him, "They've sent men who do not speak. They come at night, they leave no bodies. They are not after a message, they are after silence." Brenner listened quietly. He had stopped hoping for redemption, but he hadn't stopped seeking justice. He knew he couldn't fight these men directly, but he could expose the system that had created them. He began sending encrypted messages to select journalists, former colleagues, and even members of Congress. The contents were always vague. Breadcrumbs, hints, contradictions. He wanted someone to chase the truth the way they were chasing him. Some of his messages were intercepted, others were ignored. But one, sent to a former CIA analyst turned whistleblower, caught the attention of a small investigative unit operating out of London. They didn't know who Brenner was, but the documents attached revealed offshore accounts, shell corporations tied to weapons manufacturing, and emails between intelligence officials and private security firms. The kind of connections that could unravel careers, or worse. Start wars. Back in Afghanistan, the mountains were becoming less forgiving. A drone circled overhead for days without attacking, watching, mapping, calculating, Brenner noticed. He knew this wasn't surveillance for capture, this was preparation for a strike. And he also knew the kill order wasn't from Washington anymore. Whoever wanted him dead had bypassed protocol, but Brenner had anticipated this. He lured the drone toward an old Soviet-era tunnel network, deep beneath the cliffs. Once inside, he triggered a set of jamming devices he had salvaged from a former CIA outpost. The drone feed went black. For the first time in weeks, he had bought himself time. But time was all he had. Supplies were running low. The winter would arrive early, and the hunters were closing in. Far away in Virginia, the London investigative unit's report had reached a congressional aide with more curiosity than caution. The aide, a junior staffer working under a senator with a history of challenging the intelligence community, began piecing together the fragments. Names kept repeating: a German-born weapons engineer who vanished after the Cold War, a firm called Oryx Dynamics, a defunct operation labeled Echo Prism, all leading back to Afghanistan. One name kept coming up: Michael Brenner. The aide submitted an inquiry, unofficial, routed through a personal contact in the NSA. 2 days later, the senator's office was hit with a data breach. Emails were wiped, hard drives destroyed. The message was clear: do not pursue this. But it was too late. Somewhere in the digital shadows, the story had begun to grow. The London report leaked. Anonymous sources began to speak. Podcasts, dark web forums, military blogs. The myth of Michael Brenner had returned on in a makeshift radio transmission from a mountain peak. Brenner broadcasted a message, just 5 words, distorted by static, but unmistakable. They armed both sides. Why? The message ignited a storm. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some dismissed it as Russian propaganda. Others swore it was real. But for those who had once known Brenner, there was no doubt the voice was his. Inside Langley, a debate began to form. Some wanted to kill the story. Others argued that letting him live and continue leaking was more dangerous than eliminating him. A compromise was reached: bring him in, quietly, and lock him away forever. A facility in Poland was prepared. A team was dispatched. But Brenner wasn't waiting to be captured. In the final days before snow sealed the passes, he made one last move. He released the black file, not to the press, but to a decentralized group of data anarchists. The files went live on mirrored servers across 5 continents, encrypted, fragmented, untraceable, but real. The contents, names, locations, transactions, operations, everything. The US government immediately denied its authenticity. Tech giants began taking the files down. Domains were seized, but the damage was done. The seed had been planted, and somewhere high in the mountains of Afghanistan, a man once sworn to secrecy watched the sky burn red at dusk. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, he just disappeared into the cold wind, leaving behind a trail of truths no one wanted to believe, and a war machine suddenly afraid of the man it created. The first casualty wasn't a soldier, it was a banker. He was found in his Geneva apartment, slumped over a table covered in burner phones, shredded papers, and an untouched glass of scotch. Official cause of death: suicide. But within hours, independent analysts linked him to a shadow corporation mentioned in the leaked black file, a finance node used to funnel money between US intelligence and private military groups operating in Kabul and Helmand. The man had been the middleman, the money launderer, the financial eraser, and now, he was gone. This was not coincidence. Across the Atlantic, a journalist in Paris who had published an article titled, "The American Who Exposed a War Without Sides," vanished while jogging. No security footage, no witnesses. Her last message to a colleague simply read, "I think they found me." The silence that followed Brenner's leak wasn't the silence of disbelief, it was the silence of fear. People were beginning to realize the scope of what had happened. The leaks weren't just embarrassing to the CIA, they were nuclear. They exposed a network where war had become a currency, where ideology didn't matter, only contracts, payouts, and perpetual instability. Governments, corporations, mercenaries, all bound together by the endless war economy, and, at the center of the storm, a man the CIA once trained, trusted, and ultimately hunted. In Washington, a closed-door meeting of the Intelligence Committee was held under the highest classification level. Only a handful of senators were briefed. One aide later whispered, they didn't talk about if the files were real. They talked about what would happen if they couldn't be contained. A red-level protocol was activated, Operation Silence, Protocol Delta. It wasn't designed to kill a person. It was designed to erase them, digitally, financially. Every record of Michael Brenner was ordered purged. His birth certificate, military service, CIA employment, even family records. Databases were altered, physical documents destroyed, surveillance algorithms re-rooted. Michael Brenner no longer existed, but Brenner wasn't hiding anymore. After years of evasion, he made a bold move. He contacted someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Alina Voss, a former CIA handler, turned UN intelligence consultant, stationed in Istanbul. She was one of the few people who had believed in his instincts back in the early days. She'd once warned Langley, "Brenner doesn't disobey orders. He questions the ones that don't." Make sense? When she received the message, a GPS ping from the Caucasus Mountains, and a simple phrase, "I need to talk before they kill me," she didn't hesitate. Within 36 hours, she reached the coordinates. He was waiting, thinner, colder, but eyes sharp. She brought supplies, comes gear, and questions. Many questions. He didn't answer all of them, but he told her enough. He told her that the war had been rigged from the beginning, that private defense companies had infiltrated the intelligence apparatus, not just as contractors, but as policy shapers, that every operation, every troop deployment, every drone strike was logged, studied, and leveraged, not for victory, but for renewal. That for every Taliban leader assassinated, another was trained and armed behind the scenes, quietly propped up to justify more funding, more conflict, more control. She asked why he didn't come to her sooner. He said, "I thought I could fix it from the inside. Then I realized the inside doesn't want it fixed." Together, they drafted a plan. He would disappear again, but not aimlessly. Alina would act as his mouthpiece, his channel to the outside world. She had connections. She knew who could publish the truth, and more importantly, who would survive the blowback. But they were already being watched. A satellite phone intercept 2 days earlier had triggered an algorithm inside a secure base in Virginia. Brenner's voice signature had been matched, and a team had already been deployed, not American, but deniable. Contracted through 2 layers of shell firms. Armed with foreign gear, licensed to operate with plausible deniability. In Istanbul, Alina received a tip from an old Turkish intelligence contact. "Leave. Now they're not coming to arrest him. They're coming to finish it." She tried to warn Brenner, but he had already gone dark again. She fled the city, barely evading, an attempted abduction near the Bosphorus Bridge. The message was clear: stop helping him, or die. That's when Alina went public. In a live interview on an independent media network, she broke her silence. She didn't name Brenner, but she described the black file, the connections, the internal purge. She framed it carefully as a matter of global accountability, not vengeance. But the effect was immediate. The world began to take notice. Mainstream media initially dismissed the claims. Then, as more documents emerged, journalists began to corroborate fragments. A leaked contract here, a deleted military log there. Slowly, a picture formed, and it looked damning. And then came the tapes. From a secure server in Iceland, 5 audio files were released anonymously. Each featured conversations between high-ranking intelligence officials discussing asset neutralization, contractor integration into advisory roles, and conflict sustainability. The voices were distorted, but recognizable. Experts authenticated them. The content left no doubt. War was being managed like a business, and Michael Brenner had pulled back the curtain. Public reaction was volatile. Protests erupted in multiple cities. Congress called for hearings. Whistleblowers stepped forward. A former drone operator admitted he'd been ordered to target villages, not for strategic reasons, but to manipulate media cycles. A logistics officer confessed that supply routes had been intentionally compromised to prolong certain operations, and yet, amidst the storm, Brenner remained invisible, until a photo appeared online. Grainy, taken from a distance, showing a man matching Brenner's description in a refugee camp near Herat, Afghanistan. He was helping administer vaccines, wearing no weapons, smiling with children. The image went viral, not because of what it proved, but because of what it symbolized. This wasn't just a rogue agent. This was someone still trying to help. Even while being hunted, Langley panicked. They authorized a final option, a kill team operating under foreign jurisdiction, tasked with closing the anomaly. No paper trail, no radio contact, no return. Something had changed. Within the intelligence community, lines were starting to fracture. Some agents refused orders. Others began leaking their own information. A quiet rebellion was forming, not out of loyalty to Brenner, but out of disgust for what the agency had become. And then silence again. For weeks there were no sightings, no leaks, no messages, until a drone captured footage of a lone figure, crossing a frozen mountain ridge, backpack heavy, rifle slung low. The timestamp said it was taken near the Wakhan Corridor, a narrow pass between Afghanistan and China. A place with no satellites, no jurisdiction, no borders. Michael Brenner was walking out of history. Or deeper into it. The last light of dusk had melted into the jagged outlines of the Hindu Kush Mountains. A cold wind swept through the valleys like a whisper of forgotten wars. In a shadowy cave near the Afghan-Pakistani border, a lone figure hunched over a crude radio receiver, fingers trembling as he adjusted the frequency. It was Imogen Thomas Keating. After 8 years in hiding, He had finally broken silence. The voice that came through the static wasn't in English. It was Pashto, with fragments of Dari, and it wasn't coded, just raw, emotional speech. What the CIA intercepted that night wasn't a message for extraction. It was a confession. Keating spoke of operations gone wrong, of children caught in drone strikes, of tribal leaders who'd been allies one day and targets the next. But most disturbingly, he named names, American names, operatives, case officers, decisions made at Langley that contradicted official narratives. For a moment, Langley froze. In the operations center, analysts stared at each other in disbelief. This wasn't some rogue asset. This was a decorated field officer turned whistleblower. The man they'd hunted for nearly a decade hadn't betrayed America to the enemy, he'd exposed America to itself. Back in Afghanistan, Keating stepped outside the cave, breathing in the cold, thin air. His beard was long, streaked with gray. His eyes were sunken, but sharp. He knew they were coming. That message wasn't a plea for help, it was a trigger. The final move in a dangerous game of truth and silence. He'd lit a fire, and now the world would either see it or smother it. The team dispatched wasn't listed on any official manifest. They weren't SEALs or Delta. They were something in between, clandestine operators, off-book, working directly under a handler who never used his real name. Their objective wasn't to extract, it was to eliminate. Quietly, no noise, no witnesses. As the chopper soared through the darkness, Agent Rachel Daner sat in silence, rereading the mission brief. She'd trained with Keating. He had once been her mentor, even saved her life during a raid in Helmand. Now she was being sent to kill him. The irony cut deeper than any blade. When they landed, the night was still. No dogs, no gunfire, just the howling wind. The team split into two units, approaching the cave from different elevations. Danner moved slowly, her steps measured. A faint glow came from within the cave, a small fire, barely alive. She saw his silhouette first, sitting cross-legged, waiting. Keating didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't run, he simply looked at her and said, "Took you long enough." For a moment, she hesitated. Her rifle trembled in her hands. Every instinct screamed at her to disobey. But protocol and years of conditioning won the battle inside her mind. She raised the barrel. "Before you do it," he said softly, "just listen." He tossed her a worn notebook. Inside were pages of scribbled notes, sketches, maps, and dates. Evidence of missions that had never officially happened. Names of civilians turned targets. Entire villages erased from existence because someone, somewhere, needed plausible deniability. Daner read in silence. The truth was heavier than her weapon. When she looked up, Keating was still staring at her, not with fear, but with hope. "It lead to us," he said. "All of us." I believed in the mission. Until I saw what the mission really was. The other operatives were closing in. She could hear their footsteps. She had seconds to make a choice. She fired, but not at Keating. She fired into the rocks. A signal. Target neutralized. She called over the comms, "We'll need body recovery." When the others arrived, all they found was a pile of ashes and a burned satchel. Keating was gone, vanished into the wilderness once more. But he wasn't running, he had a new plan. Weeks later, a video surfaced online. Blurry, filmed in poor light, but unmistakably Keating's voice. He spoke not as a fugitive, but as a soldier betrayed. The video detailed covert operations, secret prisons, drone misfires, and the human cost of unchecked intelligence warfare. It spread like wildfire, despite efforts to scrub it from the web. Congress opened an inquiry. Media outlets speculated wildly. Was it real? Was Keating still alive? Why had the CIA failed to capture or kill him? Questions multiplied faster than answers. Within Langley, panic turned to fury. Someone had helped him. Someone inside had defied orders. Donna was summoned for interrogation. She denied everything. No one could prove what she'd seen. The notebook had burned in the cave, she claimed. No trace remained, but in secret, she still had it far away. Deep in the mountains of northern Pakistan, Keating moved between safe houses, aided by tribal contacts and former Afghan interpreters who remembered him as the only American who treated them like humans. He wasn't hiding out of fear. He was planning something far bigger, a data dump that would shake the intelligence world to its foundations. Encrypted hard drives, field reports, audio recordings. The real story of America's longest war, told not in headlines or press releases, but in raw, unfiltered reality. Not to shame the country, but to force it to confront the cost of its own myth. But the CIA wasn't. DONEA. New unit was formed, a Project Harrow. Its mission, hunt Keating and dismantle the growing network of sympathizers aiding him. Their methods were brutal. Safe houses were raided. Whistleblowers disappeared. Journalists were warned. The message was clear. Silence was survival. Danner went underground. Her conscience couldn't carry the burden anymore. She left Langley and disappeared, taking the notebook and a copy of the hard drives with her. Some said she met Keating again. Others believed she died crossing the border. No one knows. Years passed, Keating's voice faded from the headlines but never truly disappeared. His story became legend whispers in the intelligence community, debates in war colleges. Was he a traitor or a patriot? A hero or a fool? One day, a letter arrived at a news agency in Europe. No return address. Inside, a small USB stick. It contained hours of footage, interviews with Afghan families, names of black site directors, and one final message from Keating: "I loved my country enough to tell it the truth. What you do with it now is your choice." The footage went live. Governance condemned it. Veterans debated it. The public reacted with outrage, sorrow, and silence. Nothing changed officially, but beneath the surface, ripples began. Training manuals were rewritten. Oversight committees gained more access. Operatives were required to log more of their field actions. Small changes, but real. Keating was never seen again. Some say he died in a blizzard. Others believe he lives among the tribes, protected by the very people he once came to fight. A ghost, a myth, a mirror held up to an empire. In the end, he achieved what bullets never could. He forced the most secretive agency in the world to look itself in the eye, and sometimes, that's the most dangerous mission of all.